She broke the surface without a ripple. No splash, no gasp, no betrayal of her presence to the moonless night. Master Chief Petty Officer Yemisi Adeyemi had been underwater for 47 minutes, navigating by memory and touch alone through water so dark it felt like swimming through oil. The rebreather on her chest released nothing into the night air. No vibes, no sound, just a woman emerging from the black Pacific like a ghost crawling out of her own grave. The outpost sat 200 meters ahead, yellow lights bleeding through jungle canopy onto volcanic sand. 23 hostiles, according to the briefing. For American hostages. One way out. She did not know yet that the hostages had been dead for 6 hours. She did not know that every light in that compound was bait in a trap designed specifically for her. She did not know that the man who had sent her here was watching from a Navy destroyer 50 miles away, waiting for confirmation of her death. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Perhaps you know a veteran who served in silence, their missions never acknowledged, and their sacrifices never seen. Yemisi touched the waterproof pouch strapped against her ribs. Inside, protected by 3 layers of sealed plastic, was a photograph of a 7-year-old girl with her mother's eyes and her father's smile. Adiz, 10 years dead from leukemia. 10 years since Yemisi had arrived at the hospital room 6 hours too late, still wearing the dust of Yemen on her boots. This mission was supposed to be her last. Complete the extraction, file the paperwork, retire to Nigeria, and finally visit the grave she had never been able to face. She moved onto the beach in complete silence, her black wetsuit blending with the volcanic sand. The jungle ahead was thick with humidity and the electric hum of insects. Somewhere in that green darkness, 23 private military contractors were guarding 4 people who no longer needed guarding. Yemisi did not know their names. She did not need to. Names made things complicated. Names made you hesitate. In the water, in the dark, there were only targets and objectives. That was how she had survived 20 years in a community that had spent most of those years pretending women like her did not exist. She checked her rifle. Suppressed. Magazine seated. Safety off. The knife on her thigh was ceramic, invisible to metal detectors, sharp enough to split a hair lengthwise. She had killed 11 men with that knife over her career. She remembered each of their faces. She would remember them until the day she died. The patrol pattern was wrong. She noticed it within 30 seconds of observation. 2 guards walking the perimeter in perfect synchronization, their flashlight beams sweeping in identical arcs, their footsteps landing at identical intervals. Too perfect, too rehearsed. Real patrols got lazy. Real patrols checked their phones, stopped to urinate, complained to each other about the heat. These men were performing security. They were actors on a stage, waiting for their audience. Yemisi felt the first cold needle of suspicion pierce her concentration. She had been in enough traps to recognize the smell of one. But the mission was the mission. For Americans were depending on her. She could not abort on instinct alone. She moved through the jungle like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance, disturbing nothing. 20 years had taught her how to become part of the darkness rather than merely hiding in it. The guards never saw her. They never heard her. The first one died without knowing she was there, her knife sliding between his cervical vertebrae with surgical precision. He dropped boneless onto the volcanic soil. His radio was keyed. The transmit button was pressed, held down by a rubber band wrapped around the unit. Someone had been listening to everything. Someone had heard the soft grunt he made as he died. The trap was not ahead of her. The trap was already sprung. Yemisi moved faster now, abandoning stealth for speed. The main building was 100 meters ahead, a 2-story concrete structure that had once been a marine biology research station. She circled to the rear entrance, cleared the corners, and slipped inside. The first hostage was in the hallway. American, male, early 40s, business suit torn and stained. He had been dead for at least 6 hours, executed with a single shot to the temple and left propped against the wall like a discarded mannequin. His eyes were still open, staring at nothing. Yemisi felt her mission crumbling around her. This was not a rescue operation. This was a killing ground. Someone had lured her here, eliminated the hostages before she arrived, and was now waiting for her to walk deeper into the trap. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to return to the water, to disappear into the black Pacific and surface somewhere else, somewhere safe. But running meant leaving evidence behind. Running meant letting whoever did this escape justice. And running meant admitting that after 20 years, after everything she had survived, someone had finally outmaneuvered her. The compound speakers crackled to life. A voice filled the night, calm and cold, carrying the slight accent of Eastern Europe. It spoke her name like a man savoring a meal he had waited years to taste. Yemisi Adeyemi. My brother says hello from the bottom of the Black Sea. You have until sunrise. Then we come for you. The voice echoed off the concrete walls and faded into the jungle. Yemisi stood motionless in the hallway, her mind racing through possibilities like a computer processing threat assessments. The Black Sea. 6 years ago. Operation Black Tide. She had killed 4 men during that infiltration, threading through Russian territorial waters to extract a defecting intelligence officer. One of those men had been young, barely older than a recruit, and he had died trying to radio for help. She remembered his face. She remembered all their faces. Now his brother had found her. She moved deeper into the building, stepping over the dead hostage without looking down. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. The mission had changed. Rescue was no longer possible. Survival and intelligence gathering were all that remained. Someone had arranged this trap from inside the Navy. Someone with access to mission briefs, satellite coordinates, submarine deployment schedules. Someone who wanted her dead badly enough to sacrifice 4 American civilians as bait. The second hostage was in what had once been a laboratory. Female, late 30s, wedding ring on her left hand. She had been dead even longer than the first, her body cold and stiff. Yemisi checked her pockets and found a State Department identification card. These were not random civilians. These were diplomatic personnel. Someone had kidnapped government employees specifically to draw out a rescue mission that would put Yemisi on this island. 3 days ago, she had been standing in a swimming pool at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, watching a young woman struggle with underwater navigation. Petty Officer 3rd Class Karina Vasquez, 24 years old, fighting for a place in a community that did not want her. Yemisi had stayed 2 extra hours that night, teaching Karina techniques her grandmother had shown her in the rivers outside Lagos. How to read currents by feeling the water temperature change against your skin. How to navigate by the pressure differentials created by underwater rock formations. How to trust the water instead of fighting it. She had given Karina her personal compass before leaving for this mission, a small brass instrument her father had carried through 3 wars. It had brought Yemisi home from 12 deployments. She told Karina it would bring her home too. Now Yemisi wondered if she would ever see that compass again. The radio in the dead guard's hand crackled with chatter. She pressed it against her ear and listened. The contractors were speaking in Russian, coordinating search patterns, reporting positions. 23 of them spread across the compound and the surrounding jungle. Professional, disciplined, former military, probably Spetsnaz or GRU veterans hired out to private security firms after their government decided they were expendable. One voice cut through the chatter. The same voice from the speakers. The brother. He was giving orders with calm authority, directing his men to establish a perimeter and wait. He did not want them hunting her in the darkness. He knew what she could do in the dark. He was willing to wait until sunrise, when the light would strip away her greatest advantage. Yemisi checked her watch. 4 hours until dawn. 4 hours to turn the trap around. She found the 3rd hostage in a storage room, and the 4th in a basement that smelled of mold and seawater. Both dead. Both executed with the same clinical precision. Whoever had killed them had not enjoyed it. This was business, not sadism. That made it worse somehow. These people had died as props in someone else's revenge fantasy, their lives traded away like chips in a poker game. In the 4th hostage's pocket, she found a folded piece of paper. A manifest. shipping coordinates and cargo weights, and a name at the bottom that made her blood freeze in her veins. The operation had a code name, Phantom Burial. Her call sign was Phantom, had been for 15 years. Only a handful of people knew that name. Her team, her commanders, the intelligence officers who briefed her missions, and Lieutenant Commander Vernon Haskell. She remembered him suddenly, vividly. 3 years ago, standing in a briefing room at Special Warfare Command, his hand on her shoulder, his voice warm with false friendship. He had called her little sister. He had smiled at her jokes. He had recommended her for the Silver Star after an operation in Syria that had gone sideways in every possible way. He had also been passed over for promotion 6 months later, when the after-action report credited her with saving the mission by contradicting his orders. She remembered the look in his eyes when he found out, the smile that did not reach anywhere near his soul, the way he had congratulated her through teeth clenched tight enough to crack. She had not thought about him since. Operators moved on. Grudges were luxuries. The mission was always more important than ego. But Vernon Haskell had not moved on. Vernon Haskell had been waiting. Yemisi folded the manifest and tucked it into her wetsuit. Evidence. Proof that someone inside Naval Special Warfare had arranged her death. She did not have enough yet. The manifest alone could be explained away, denied, buried in classification protocols. She needed more. She needed a confession or a communication or something that could not be ignored. The compound had a communication tower on the northern edge. She had spotted it during her approach, a skeletal structure rising above the jungle canopy. If she could reach it, she could transmit an emergency signal to the submarine that had dropped her 3 miles offshore. Extraction, survival, a chance to expose the truth. She crept toward the window and studied the tower through the darkness. Floodlights surrounded it. Guards patrolled its base. And something else. Something wrong. Wires running from the base of the tower to a junction box half buried in the volcanic soil. The kind of junction box that held detonators. The tower was rigged to explode. They wanted her to try for it. They wanted her to reveal herself, reaching for the one thing that looked like hope. Yemisi smiled grimly in the darkness. She had not survived 20 years by reaching for obvious hope. She had survived by creating her own. She turned away from the window and began hunting the hunters. The generator building sat 50 meters west of the main compound, a squat concrete structure humming with the steady rhythm of diesel engines. 2 guards patrolled its perimeter in lazy circles, their attention dulled by hours of uneventful watching. They expected her to run for the communication tower. They expected her to hide until sunrise. They did not expect her to attack. Yemisi crossed the open ground in complete silence, her body low against the volcanic soil, her movements timed to the rhythm of the jungle insects. The guards never saw her coming. The first one died with her knife in his throat, his body lowered gently to the ground before it could make a sound. The second turned at exactly the wrong moment and found her standing behind him like a shadow given form. He managed half a breath before she ended him. She slipped inside the generator building and studied the machinery. 3 diesel generators feeding power to the entire compound. Floodlights, security cameras, the communication tower. Everything dependent on this single point of failure. She found the main breaker panel and wrapped her fingers around the master switch. The compound plunged into darkness. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the shouting began. Men calling to each other in Russian, flashlight beams cutting wild arcs through the jungle, the organized perimeter dissolving into chaos. They had prepared for many scenarios. They had not prepared for her to take away the light. Yemisi moved through the darkness like she was born to it. The barracks sat on the eastern edge of the compound, a prefabricated building housing the bulk of the contractor force. She reached it while they were still stumbling over each other, still trying to restore order. The door was unlocked. Why would they lock it? They were the hunters, not the hunted. For men inside, sleeping or resting or checking their weapons by flashlight. They died quickly and quietly, her knife doing work that her rifle would have announced to the entire island. She felt nothing as she killed them. That was the training. That was the 20 years of learning to separate the act from the emotion. She would feel it later, in the quiet hours when the mission was over and the faces came back to haunt her. But not now. Now, there's only the next target and the next and the next. She was halfway to the main building when the jungle behind her erupted in flames. The brother had adapted faster than she expected. If he could not find her in the darkness, he would take the darkness away. Contractors with flamethrowers were torching the vegetation in expanding circles, creating walls of fire that pushed inward toward the compound center. Smoke billowed into the night sky. The heat reached her even from 100 meters away. Yemisi retreated toward the water. The reef line she had navigated during her approach contained underwater caves, pockets of air trapped in volcanic rock formations. She had mapped them mentally during her swim, noting their positions as potential fallback points. Now they were her only option. She hit the water without slowing and dove deep, letting the black Pacific swallow her whole. The flames above created dancing orange reflections on the surface, but the light did not penetrate more than a few meters. Below that was her world. Below that she was invisible. The cave was exactly where she remembered it, a narrow opening in the reef that widened into a chamber large enough to hold a dozen people. She surfaced inside and found air, stale but breathable, trapped against the rock ceiling. Her shoulder was throbbing from the swim. Her muscles burned with exhaustion. She had been awake for over 30 hours, operating on adrenaline and discipline alone. She allowed herself 30 seconds of rest. No more. 30 seconds to breathe, to check her weapons, to touch the waterproof pouch against her ribs and feel the photograph inside. Adiz would have been 17 now, a young woman, probably stubborn like her mother, probably kind like her father. Yemisi tried to imagine what she would look like and found that she could not. The 7-year-old in the photograph was frozen in time, forever small, forever smiling, forever slipping away in a hospital bed, while her mother cleared buildings in a country that did not matter anymore. She whispered a prayer in Yoruba, the words her grandmother had taught her before she died. Words for protection, for strength, for the courage to face what could not be faced. The cave wall swallowed the sound and gave nothing back. A new sound reached her ears. Mechanical, rhythmic, coming from somewhere in the reef. She dove back under and swam toward it, her eyes useless in the absolute blackness. Her fingers found the source mounted on a coral formation. A sensor, underwater motion detection. They had wired the entire reef. Her extraction route was compromised. The submarine that had dropped her was supposed to surface 3 miles offshore at 0600, but if she tried to swim to the rendezvous point, they would track her every movement. They would be waiting when she surfaced. There was only one way off this island now. Through the compound. Through the men who wanted her dead. Through whatever trap the brother had prepared for the woman who had killed his family. Yemisi swam back to the cave and surfaced in the darkness. She checked her ammunition. 2 magazines remaining. 18 rounds. Plus the knife. Plus whatever she could take from the men she killed. It would have to be enough. She slipped out of the cave and began swimming toward shore, toward the flames, toward the brother who was waiting for her with 6 years of grief sharpened into a weapon. Above the water, she could hear him speaking on the compound speakers again. His voice calm, patient, certain. He was telling his men that she was already dead, that the water had claimed her, that they should search the reef at dawn and recover her body. He did not know that the black water had never claimed Yemisi Adeyemi. The black water had raised her. She surfaced at the eastern edge of the island where the volcanic rock formed a natural seawall against the Pacific. The flames had not reached this section yet. The darkness here was still hers. She pulled herself onto the rocks and lay flat, watching the compound through the scope of her rifle. New lights were approaching from the sea. A rigid hull inflatable boat cutting through the waves, its running lights blinking in the darkness. She counted the silhouettes on board. 12 additional contractors, and one figure standing at the bow, wearing a uniform she recognized even at this distance. Navy dress whites. The kind of uniform an officer would wear to a ceremony or a funeral. Someone from her own service had come to watch her die. The boat reached the small dock on the southern shore, and the contractors spilled out, spreading into defensive positions with practiced efficiency. The officer remained on the dock, speaking into a satellite phone, his body language radiating the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. She could not see his face. She did not need to. She already knew who it was. 6 years ago, Lieutenant Commander Vernon Haskell had stood beside her in a briefing room in Bahrain, explaining the mission parameters for Operation Black Tide. They would infiltrate Russian territorial waters, extract a defecting FSB officer, and exfiltrate through the Black Sea before anyone knew they were there. Simple on paper, nightmarish in execution. The Russians had been waiting for them, tipped off by a source no one ever identified. Half the team died in the first 30 seconds. Yemisi had saved the mission by ignoring Haskell's order to abort, pushing deeper into the compound while he called for extraction. She had pulled the defector out through a drainage tunnel while Haskell waited on the submarine, and she had killed 4 men in the process. One of those men had been young, early 20s, trying to radio for help when she put a knife through his throat. She remembered his eyes, the confusion, the fear, the way he had reached for her hand as if she might somehow take it back. His brother was here now, and so was the man who had sent her into that nightmare. The satellite phone conversation ended. Haskell walked up the dock toward the compound, and for one brief moment his face passed through a beam of firelight. She saw him clearly through her scope, older than she remembered, thinner, the same false smile frozen on his lips like a mask he had forgotten to remove. She could kill him now. One shot, center mass. He would be dead before he heard the sound. But killing him would not expose the network. Killing him would not prove what he had done. She needed him alive. She needed him talking. She needed evidence that could not be buried or classified or explained away. The radio in her pocket crackled. Contractor chatter. Then a new voice cut through the static. Haskell's voice, using a call sign she did not recognize, speaking to the brother with the calm authority of a man who believed he controlled the situation. She listened as they discussed her. The brother wanted to search the reef at first light. Haskell agreed, but suggested caution. She was dangerous, he said. More dangerous than the brother understood. She had a way of surviving things that should have killed her. The brother laughed at that. He said he had been hunting dangerous women his whole life. He said this one would be no different. Haskell's response made her blood freeze. He told the brother about Adiz, about the daughter who had died while Yemisi was on a mission, about the guilt she carried like a stone around her neck. He said if they wanted to break her, they should use the girl. He said grief was the only weapon that had ever worked against Yemisi Adeyemi. She lowered the rifle and pressed her forehead against the volcanic rock. The heat from the distant flames warmed her face. The cold from the ocean soaked her back. She existed in the space between fire and water, between rage and discipline, between the woman who wanted to charge into that compound and kill everyone who had spoken her daughter's name and the operator who knew that survival required patience. Haskell had sold her out, not just her mission, her grief, her secrets, the things she had told him in quiet moments between operations when she thought he was her friend. She would make him answer for that. But not yet. Not until she had everything she needed. The contractors were spreading out now, reinforcing the perimeter, setting up spotlights powered by portable generators. The brother was rebuilding the trap, adding more layers, more guns, more eyes. He thought she was hiding somewhere on the island, waiting for a chance to escape. He did not know she had stopped running. She spotted him near the main building, directing his men with sharp gestures. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the deliberate grace of a man who had spent decades learning violence. He turned toward the eastern rocks where she lay hidden, and for one impossible moment, she thought he was looking directly at her. Then he turned away and continued issuing orders. Yemisi rose to a crouch and began moving through the shadows. The reinforcements had changed the math. 35 hostiles now instead of 23. The odds had never been good. Now they were nearly impossible. Nearly was not the same as completely. She circled wide around the compound, looking for gaps in the new perimeter, cataloging positions and patrol routes. The brother had made one mistake. He had placed all his new men on the southern and western approaches, assuming she would try to escape toward open water. He had left the jungle approach to the north thinly guarded. She was halfway to the northern perimeter when she saw him. The brother, alone, walking toward the tree line with a flashlight in one hand and a pistol in the other. He was hunting her personally now, impatient, unwilling to wait for dawn. She could have let him pass. She could have slipped through the gap and disappeared into the jungle. But something in the way he moved, something in the set of his shoulders, told her this confrontation was inevitable. Better now, on her terms, than later on his. She stepped out of the shadows and let him see her. He stopped. The flashlight beam found her face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke her name, and she saw the grief in his eyes that mirrored her own. The brother did not raise his weapon. Neither did she. They stood 10 meters apart in the jungle darkness, two predators recognizing something familiar in each other. The flashlight beam held steady on her face, and she let him look. Let him see the woman who had taken his brother from him. He spoke first. His English was precise, almost formal, shaped by years of military training and international contracts. He said his name was Casimir Varnin. He said his brother had been Dmitri. He said Dmitri had been 23 years old when she killed him. Yemisi said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had killed a young man in the Black Sea because the mission required it. She had not known his name. She had not known he had a brother who would spend 6 years hunting her across the world. Varnin took a step closer. His pistol remained at his side. He asked if she remembered Dmitri's face, asked if she remembered the way he had reached for her hand as he died. She remembered. She would always remember. Varnin's voice cracked for the first time. He asked if she knew what Dmitri had been doing that night, asked if she knew why he had been trying to reach the radio. She did not answer. The mission briefing had identified him as a hostile combatant. That was all she had needed to know. He told her anyway. Dmitri had not been trying to call for reinforcements. He had been trying to defect. He had been feeding information to American intelligence for 6 months, and that night was supposed to be his extraction. He was trying to reach the radio to tell them he was coming out. He was trying to surrender. The words hit her like bullets. She had killed a man who was trying to come to her side. She had put a knife through the throat of someone who wanted to help. Varnin saw the impact on her face and smiled without warmth. He said the intelligence officer she extracted that night had confirmed it afterward. Dmitri was an asset. Dmitri was supposed to live. But the mission parameters had been wrong, and she had been too efficient to hesitate. Yemisi felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. 20 years of operations. Hundreds of targets. She had always believed the intelligence. She had always trusted the briefings. Now she understood that trust had made her a weapon pointed at the wrong people. She asked who had provided the faulty intelligence for Operation Black Tide. Varnin's smile widened. He said she already knew. He said the same man who had sent her here tonight had sent her brother's killer 6 years ago. Vernon Haskell had been playing both sides for longer than anyone suspected. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Haskell had known Dmitri was an asset. Haskell had deliberately left that information out of the briefing. He had wanted the operation to succeed, but he had also wanted Dmitri dead. Someone had paid him to ensure the young Russian never made it to American soil. And now Haskell had paid Varnin to ensure Yemisi never made it home. She raised her rifle. Varnin raised his pistol. The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. Then he spoke again. He said killing her would not bring Dmitri back. He said he'd spent 6 years imagining this moment. And now that it was here, he felt nothing but emptiness. He asked if she felt the same emptiness when she thought about her daughter. The words cut deeper than any blade. She thought about Adiz in the hospital bed, small and pale and fading. She thought about the phone call that came too late, the flight that took too long, the door she had opened to find her husband weeping beside an empty bed. She had not been there. She had been clearing buildings in Yemen, following orders, trusting the mission. She had not been there when her daughter needed her most. Varnin lowered his pistol slightly. He said they were the same, she and he. Killers shaped by loss. Weapons pointed at each other by men who did not care if they lived or died. He said Haskell was the real enemy. Haskell was the one who deserved to answer for everything. For a moment, she considered it. An alliance born of mutual hatred. Two broken people joining forces against the man who had broken them. It would be easier. The odds would shift in her favor. Then Varnon's radio crackled. A contractor reporting movement near the northern perimeter. The moment shattered. His eyes hardened. The grief disappeared behind a mask of professional violence. He raised his pistol and fired. The bullet caught her in the left shoulder, spinning her backward into the jungle. She hit the ground hard and rolled, ignoring the white-hot pain that exploded through her arm. Her rifle came up instinctively, but he was already gone, melting into the darkness as smoothly as she would have. She pressed her hand against the wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing bone and major arteries. She would live, but her left arm was compromised. Her shooting would suffer. The odds had just gotten worse. She crawled deeper into the jungle, leaving a blood trail she could not hide. The contractors would find it at dawn. They would track her like a wounded animal. She needed to go to ground. She needed to treat the wound and rest and think. The underground bunker system beneath the main building was her only option. Cold War tunnels that the contractors might not know about. A place to hide while she figured out how to survive until extraction, if extraction was even coming. She found the bunker entrance behind a collapsed storage shed, a rusted hatch half buried in volcanic soil. The hinges screamed as she pulled it open, but there was no one close enough to hear. She dropped into the darkness below and pulled the hatch closed behind her. The tunnels smelled of mold and seawater and something else. Something chemical. Something wrong. She activated her flashlight and saw the barrels lining the walls. Dozens of them, marked with symbols she recognized from classified briefings. Biological weapons. Stored here since the Cold War. Enough to kill everyone on the island. Enough to kill everyone on the island, including herself. The barrels stretched into the darkness like soldiers standing at attention. Yemisi counted 47 of them before her flashlight beam faded into nothing. Each one marked with faded Cyrillic lettering and international hazard symbols that needed no translation. This island had been a Soviet research station during the Cold War, a place where scientists had weaponized diseases that could kill millions. The research had been abandoned decades ago. The weapons had been left behind. She could end everything right now. Open the barrels. Let the wind carry the pathogens across the compound. Every contractor, every enemy, every person who had come here to kill her would be dead within hours. Varnon, Haskell, all of them, including herself. She stood in the darkness and considered it. The mission was already failed. The hostages were dead. Her extraction was compromised. She was wounded and outnumbered and hunted by men who would not stop until they found her body. There was a certain logic to taking them all with her. A final victory that no one could take away. Then she thought about Karina Vasquez, the young woman she had trained 3 days ago. The compass she had given her. The promise that it would bring her home. She thought about Emeka, her husband, waiting in their apartment in San Diego, checking his phone every hour, trusting that she would come back like she always did. She thought about the grave in Nigeria she had never visited, the daughter she had never properly mourned. If she died here, she would never stand at that grave. She would never tell Adiz she was sorry. She would never say the words she had been carrying for 10 years. Yemisi turned away from the barrels and moved deeper into the bunker. She would not become what they thought she was. She would not let Haskell turn her into a weapon of mass destruction. She would find another way. The tunnels branched and twisted beneath the island like the roots of a dead tree. She followed them by instinct, mapping the layout in her mind, searching for anything useful. Medical supplies in an abandoned infirmary. Ammunition that had corroded beyond use. Documents in filing cabinets that crumbled at her touch. Then she found the communication room. It was small and cramped, filled with equipment that had been obsolete before she was born. But someone had been here recently. New cables ran along the walls. A modern laptop sat open on a desk covered in dust. The screen was dark, but the power light blinked steadily, waiting. She touched the keyboard and the screen came alive. A video feed filled the display. The compound above, seen from multiple camera angles. The contractors patrolling. The fires still burning at the jungle's edge. And in the main building, sitting at a table with a satellite phone pressed to his ear, Vernon Haskell. She could hear him through the laptop speakers. The audio was scratchy but clear enough. He was talking to someone on the other end about payment transfers and offshore accounts and the elimination of loose ends. He was laughing about something. He was using her name. Yemisi searched the laptop and found folders full of files. Communications, contracts, lists of names and dates and amounts. 3 years of intelligence sold to the highest bidder. Operations compromised. Operators killed. All of it documented with the meticulous precision of a man who never expected to be caught. She found the file labeled Phantom Burial and opened it. Her own face stared back at her from a surveillance photograph. Her service record, her psychological evaluations, her daughter's death certificate. Everything Haskell needed to know about her, compiled into a dossier and sold to Casimir Varnin for $2 million. He had sold her grief. He had sold her secrets. He had sold 20 years of service to a man who wanted nothing more than to watch her die. She copied everything onto a portable drive she found in the desk drawer. The evidence was overwhelming. Enough to end Haskell's career. Enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life. Enough to expose the network of buyers and sellers who had profited from the deaths of American operators. A sound echoed through the tunnels. Footsteps. Voices. The contractors had found the bunker entrance. She killed the laptop screen and pressed herself against the wall. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. Someone was giving orders in Russian. They were going to search the tunnels. They were going to find her. She looked at the portable drive in her hand. The evidence that could destroy Haskell. The proof that could expose everything. If she died here, it died with her. Water began seeping under the door. She understood immediately. They were not going to search the tunnels. They were going to flood them. Someone had opened the sea gates, letting the Pacific pour into the underground passages. They were going to drown her like a rat in a trap. The water rose quickly, cold and black and hungry. It reached her ankles, then her knees, then her waist. The communication room was filling faster than the tunnels, the seawater pouring through cracks in the concrete walls. She had minutes at most. She dove under the rising water and swam toward the tunnel entrance, fighting against the current that pushed her back. Her wounded shoulder screamed with every stroke. Her lungs burned for air. The darkness was absolute, the water too murky to see anything even with her eyes open. She remembered her grandmother's voice. Trust the water. Feel the temperature. Follow the current to its source. The current was flowing inward, carrying seawater from somewhere outside. If she followed it backward, against the flow, she would find the opening. She swam until her lungs were fire. Swam until her vision began to blur at the edges. Swam until she felt warm water mixing with cold and knew she was close to a thermal vent. She found the opening by touch alone, a crack in a volcanic rock barely wide enough for her body. She squeezed through and felt the current release her, felt the water temperature shift, felt the pressure change as she rose toward the surface. She broke into open air 300 meters from the compound, gasping and choking, the portable drive still clutched in her bleeding hand. The contractors were searching the bunker entrance. Varnin was directing the flooding. Haskell was watching from the main building with a smile on his face. None of them knew she had escaped. None of them knew what she carried. She began swimming toward the shore, toward the compound, toward the men who thought they had already won. She reached the shore as the first gray light of dawn began bleeding across the eastern horizon. Her shoulder wound had reopened during the swim, leaving a trail of blood in the water behind her. She pressed her palm against the hole and felt the warm pulse of her own life leaking through her fingers. The portable drive was secure in the waterproof pouch against her ribs, nestled beside the photograph of Adiz. Evidence and memory. The two things she could not afford to lose. The compound was chaos. Contractors running between buildings, shouting at each other, convinced she was dead in the flooded tunnels. Varnin stood at the bunker entrance, watching the water pour in, his face unreadable in the growing light. Haskell was nowhere to be seen, probably in the main building, already composing the report that would explain her death as an unfortunate mission failure. She needed medical attention. She needed rest. She needed a plan that did not involve dying on a volcanic island 8,000 miles from home. She found shelter in a storage shed near the dock, a forgotten structure filled with rusted equipment and the smell of old diesel. She used strips torn from her wet suit to bind the shoulder wound, pulling the makeshift bandage tight enough to slow the bleeding. It was not enough. She was losing too much blood. If she did not get proper treatment within the next few hours, she would go into shock. The radio in her pocket crackled with contractor chatter. They were organizing search parties to sweep the island, convinced she had somehow escaped the bunker before it flooded. Varnon was offering a bonus to whoever found her body. Haskell was insisting they complete the sweep before noon so he could return to the Galloway with proof of her death. She was out of time. The satellite phone on the dock was her only option. If she could reach it, she could transmit the evidence directly to NCIS, to SEAL Team Command, to anyone with the authority to expose Haskell's network. The transmission would take less than 2 minutes. She just needed to survive long enough to press send. She waited until the search parties had moved into the jungle, leaving the dock lightly guarded. 2 contractors standing watch, their attention focused on the tree line rather than the water behind them. She slipped out of the shed and moved along the shoreline, staying low, using the rocks and the growing shadows to mask her approach. The first guard died without a sound. The second turned at the wrong moment and saw her coming. He managed to raise his weapon before her knife found his throat. He fell against the dock railing and slid into the water, leaving a dark stain on the wooden planks. She reached the satellite phone and began entering the transmission codes. Her fingers were numb from cold and blood loss. The numbers blurred on the screen. She blinked hard and forced herself to focus. A voice spoke behind her. Varnon. She turned slowly, the phone still in her hand. He stood at the end of the dock with his pistol aimed at her chest. His face was calm, almost peaceful. He looked like a man who had finally found what he had been searching for. He asked if she was trying to call for help. She said she was trying to call for justice. He laughed at that, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. He said justice was a fairy tale that powerful men told themselves to feel better about the things they did. He said the only real justice in the world was the kind you took with your own hands. She asked if killing her would feel like justice. He did not answer. The pistol remained steady. The gray light of dawn painted his face in shades of exhaustion and grief. She told him about the evidence, about the file she had found in the bunker, about the 3 years of intelligence Haskell had sold, the operators who had died because of his greed, the network of buyers and sellers who had profited from American blood. She told him the truth about Operation Black Tide, that Haskell had known Dmitri was an asset, that Haskell had deliberately kept that information from the mission brief, that his brother had died because one man wanted to cover his tracks. Varnon's face changed. The calm cracked. Something raw and wounded surfaced beneath the mask of professional violence. He asked if she had proof. She held up the portable drive. Everything he needed to destroy the man who had destroyed his brother. Everything he needed to understand that his revenge had been pointed at the wrong target for 6 years. He lowered the pistol slightly. Not all the way, but enough. He asked what she wanted. She said she wanted to send the evidence before she bled to death on this dock. She said she wanted Haskell to answer for what he had done. She said she wanted to go home and visit her daughter's grave and tell her she was sorry for not being there. Varnon was silent for a long moment. The waves lapped against the dock pilings. The search parties shouted to each other in the distant jungle. He holstered his pistol. He said he would help her reach the transmission point. He said he would keep his men away long enough for her to send the evidence. He said he wanted Haskell destroyed more than he wanted her dead. She asked why he would help her after everything. He said Dmitri had believed in something, had believed strongly enough to risk his life trying to defect. Varnon had spent 6 years trying to avenge a brother he had not truly understood. Now he understood. Dmitri would not have wanted this. Dmitri would have wanted the truth. He asked about Adiz. Not cruelly this time. Gently. like a man who recognized the weight of loss in another person's eyes. She told him. The leukemia, the hospital, the door she had opened 6 hours too late, the grave in Nigeria she had never been able to face. He nodded slowly. He said grief was a strange thing. It made you hunt the wrong enemies. It made you forget who you were before the loss. He asked what Adiz had been like. She smiled for the first time in what felt like years. She said Adiz had been stubborn, brave, curious about everything. She had wanted to be a marine biologist. She had loved the ocean. Varnon almost smiled back. He said Dimitri had loved the ocean too. Two killers stood on a dock in the gray dawn light, bound by grief and the ghosts of the people they had failed to save. Neither forgave the other. Neither forgot. But for one moment they understood. Then Varnon turned and walked toward the compound to clear a path. And Yemisi began typing the transmission that would end Vernon Haskell's world. The transmission would take 90 seconds to complete. 90 seconds to upload 3 years of evidence to servers on 3 different continents. 90 seconds to end the career of a man who had sold his country for money and revenge. Yemisi watched the progress bar crawl across the screen and willed it to move faster. Varnon's voice crackled over the contractor radio frequency. He was ordering his men to sweep the western jungle, pulling them away from the dock, buying her the time she needed. She did not know how long his loyalty would last. She did not know if loyalty was even the right word for what existed between them. But for now, it was enough. 60 seconds remaining. She thought about Emeka, her husband, the man who had held their daughter alone while Yemisi cleared buildings on the other side of the world. He had never blamed her. Not once. He had simply held her when she finally came home, held her while she shook with grief she could not express, held her through the nights where she woke up screaming from dreams she could not remember. She had called him before this mission. 3 days ago, standing in the hallway outside the briefing room, her voice low so no one would hear. He had begged her not to go. He said he had a feeling, a weight in his chest that would not lift. He said something was wrong with this mission, that the timing was wrong, that everything about it felt like a trap. She had promised him it was the last one. She had said those words so many times before. This time she meant them. This time she would come home and stay home and finally become the wife he deserved. He had been silent for a long moment. Then he said he loved her. He said he would be waiting. He said the grave in Nigeria was not going anywhere, and neither was he. 30 seconds remaining. She wondered if he was awake right now, if he was lying in their bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling that weight in his chest grow heavier with every passing hour. She wondered if he knew somehow that she was bleeding on a dock 8,000 miles away, watching a progress bar determine whether she lived or died. 15 seconds. Gunfire erupted somewhere in the compound. Single shots at first, then a sustained burst that echoed off the concrete buildings. Varnon's voice cut through the radio chatter, sharp and commanding. He was engaging someone, or someone was engaging him. 10 seconds. She heard footsteps on the dock behind her. Heavy, deliberate. The footsteps of a man who did not need to hurry because he believed he had already won. 5 seconds. The transmission completed. The progress bar filled. The screen displayed a confirmation message in green letters that seemed impossibly bright in the gray dawn light. She turned around. Vernon Haskell stood at the end of the dock, a pistol in his hand and a smile on his face. His navy dress whites were immaculate despite the chaos around him. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked like he was attending a ceremony rather than a murder. He said he was impressed. He said he had expected her to die in the bunker. He said drowning would have been poetic, given her reputation as a combat diver. She said nothing. The satellite phone was still in her hand. The transmission was complete. Whatever happened now, the evidence was already spreading across the world. He took a step closer. The pistol remained aimed at her chest. He asked if she really thought a transmission would save her. He said he had people everywhere. NCIS, SEAL Command, the Pentagon, people who owed him favors, people who would bury the evidence before anyone important ever saw it. She said he was lying. He laughed, the same warm laugh she remembered from years of shared missions and quiet conversations. The laugh of a man who had pretended to be her friend while planning her death. He said she had always been naive, always believing in the system, always trusting that the good guys would win if she just followed orders and completed the mission. He said that was why he had chosen her for Operation Black Tide, because she would not question the intelligence, because she would kill whoever she was told to kill without asking why. She felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. He was right. She had been naive. She had trusted the briefings and the commanders and the mission parameters. She had believed the system was fundamentally good, even when evidence suggested otherwise. But naive was not the same as stupid. She asked him why he had done it. 3 years of selling intelligence. Operators dead because of his greed. His own people sacrificed for money. His smile faded. Something cold and bitter surfaced in his eyes. He said the Navy had taken everything from him. Promotions he deserved given to people who played politics better. Recognition for operations he had planned given to operators who contradicted his orders. 20 years of service rewarded with a dead-end posting and a pension that would not cover his daughter's college tuition. He said Yemisi had been the final insult. The silver star she received for Black Tide should have been his. The commendation that went into her file should have gone into his. She had stolen his legacy, and now he was taking it back. She understood then. This was not about money. This was about ego. A small man who could not accept that others were better than him. So he burned everything down rather than admit the truth. She almost pitied him. The gunfire in the compound had stopped. The radio was silent. She did not know if Varnon was alive or dead. She did not know if his distraction had been enough. Haskell raised the pistol. He said it was time to finish this. He said he would tell the Navy she died a hero, killed in action during a failed rescue mission. He said her husband would receive a folded flag and a letter of condolence signed by the Secretary of the Navy. She looked past him, toward the water, toward the black Pacific that had carried her to this island and would carry her away from it. She said he had forgotten something. He asked what. She said he had forgotten that she was still standing in the water. She dropped backward off the dock and vanished beneath the surface. The bullets followed her down, punching through the water in white trails of bubbles. But she was already gone, already swimming, already becoming one with the darkness that had always been her home. Above her, Haskell was screaming for his men. Below her, the black water welcomed her back. She swam beneath the dock, using the pilings for cover, letting the current carry her toward the eastern shore. Above her, she could hear Haskell shouting, his voice sharp with fury and disbelief. He was calling for divers, calling for spotlights, calling for every man on the island to find her and finish what he had started. But divers took time to deploy. Spotlights could not penetrate the volcanic murk that clouded these waters. And Yemisi Adeyemi had been swimming in darkness since before most of these men learned to hold their breath. She surfaced behind a rock formation 50 meters from the dock, just long enough to fill her lungs. The compound was fully awake now, contractors scrambling in every direction, the organized perimeter collapsing into chaos. Varnon was nowhere to be seen. She did not know if he had survived the gunfire. She did not have time to find out. The transmission was complete. The evidence was spreading. But Haskell was right about one thing. He had connections everywhere. If she died on this island, those connections might be enough to bury the truth. She needed to survive. She needed to be the witness who could not be silenced. She swam parallel to the shore until she reached the main building, then pulled herself onto the rocks and moved through the shadows toward the rear entrance. The contractors were focused on the water, convinced she was still swimming. They did not expect her to double back into the heart of their compound. The main building was nearly empty. 2 guards at the front entrance, their attention fixed on the dock. 1 technician in the communication room, monitoring radio frequencies and satellite feeds. She slipped past all of them like smoke through a cracked window. She found Varnon in the basement. He was sitting against the wall, his hand pressed against a wound in his side, his face pale and slick with sweat. One of his own men had shot him. Haskell's order, probably. Eliminate the liability. Tie up the loose end. He looked up when she entered and managed something that was almost a smile. He said he had wondered if she would come back for him. She said she was not here for him. She was here for Haskell. He laughed at that, a wet sound that suggested internal bleeding. He said Haskell was on the dock, screaming at his men to find her. He said the man was unraveling, losing control, making mistakes. She asked if Varnon could walk. He said he could try. She helped him to his feet, and together they moved through the basement toward the rear stairs. He was heavier than he looked, and each step sent fresh blood seeping through his fingers. She did not know why she was helping him. He had tried to kill her. He had spent 6 years hunting her. But something had changed on that dock. Something had shifted when they spoke about Dimitri and Adiz. They were not friends. They would never be friends. But they were no longer enemies. The rear stairs led to a hallway that connected to the main entrance. She could hear Haskell's voice echoing through the building, giving orders that contradicted each other, demanding results that his men could not deliver. He was losing his grip on the situation. The calm mask he had worn for 3 years was cracking under the pressure of imminent exposure. She left Varnon at the base of the stairs and moved toward the front entrance. The 2 guards were still focused on the dock. She took them both from behind, quick and silent, and dragged their bodies into an empty room. Haskell did not notice. He was too busy screaming at the men on the dock to notice anything. She stepped out of the building and into the gray morning light. Haskell. He spun around, the pistol in his hand rising instinctively. His eyes went wide when he saw her. She was supposed to be dead. She was supposed to be drowning in the black Pacific with his bullets in her chest. She said his transmission had reached NCIS headquarters in Washington. She said it had reached SEAL Team Command in Coronado. She said it had reached 3 major news organizations and the offices of 4 congressional oversight committees. His face went white. She said his connections would not be enough. She said the evidence was too widespread, the recipients too numerous, the proof too damning. She said Vernon Haskell was finished, and the only question left was whether he would spend the rest of his life in Leavenworth or die on this dock, trying to kill the woman who had exposed him. He raised the pistol. His hand was shaking. She did not move. He screamed at her, called her names, blamed her for everything. Said she had ruined his life by being better than him. Said she had taken everything he deserved. Said she was the reason he had become what he was. She said he had always been what he was. She said the Navy had not made him a traitor. She said she had not made him a murderer. She said he had chosen every step of the path that led him to this moment. The remaining contractors were watching now. Navy sailors from the Galloway who had accompanied Haskell to the island. Men who had believed they were following a legitimate commander on a legitimate mission. Men who were now hearing the truth about the officer they served. One of them stepped forward. A chief petty officer with 20 years of service written in the lines of his face. He asked Haskell if it was true. Asked if he had really sold intelligence. Asked if he had really gotten American operators killed. Haskell said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The chief drew his sidearm and aimed it at Haskell's back. He said Lieutenant Commander Haskell was under arrest for treason, espionage, and murder. He said Haskell should lower his weapon and surrender immediately. Haskell's hand trembled. The pistol wavered between Yemisi and the men behind him. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the desperate search for an escape that did not exist. He lunged for Varnon. Somehow the Russian had made it to the doorway, propping himself against the frame, a pistol in his bloody hand. Haskell grabbed him, pressed the gun to his temple, started screaming about hostages and helicopters and safe passage off the island. Varnon looked at Yemisi over Haskell's shoulder. His eyes were calm, peaceful. He mouthed a single word, Dimitri. Then he jammed his elbow into Haskell's wounded pride and twisted free. Yemisi fired once. Center mass. Haskell dropped to his knees, staring at the hole in his chest with something like surprise. He tried to say something. It came out as a whisper. He said she had destroyed him. She said he had destroyed himself. Vernon Haskell died on his knees in the gray morning light, surrounded by the men he had betrayed and the woman he had tried to murder. The sun broke over the eastern horizon and painted the compound in shades of gold and crimson. Yemisi stood over Haskell's body and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just the hollow emptiness that came after 20 years of missions that ended in death. The chief petty officer approached her slowly, his weapon holstered, his hands visible. He introduced himself as Chief Morrison. He said he had served under Haskell for 2 years. He said he had trusted the man. He said he felt like a fool. Yemisi said Haskell had fooled everyone. That was what made him dangerous. Morrison nodded and looked at the body. He said they needed to secure the scene, needed to contact the Galloway, needed to figure out what the hell had happened on this island, and who was going to explain it to command. She said she would explain everything. But first she needed to make sure Varnin did not bleed to death. The Russian had collapsed against the doorframe, his face gray, his breathing shallow. She knelt beside him and checked the wound. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs but tearing through muscle and tissue. He would live if he received proper treatment. He might die if he did not. She asked Morrison if the Galloway had medical facilities. He said it did. She said Varnin needed to be evacuated immediately. Morrison hesitated. He said Varnin was a hostile, a contractor who had been trying to kill American personnel. She said Varnin was the reason she was still alive. She said he had turned against Haskell when he learned the truth. She said without his help, the evidence would never have been transmitted and Haskell would have escaped justice. Morrison studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded and called for a medical evacuation team. The remaining contractors had surrendered without resistance. 15 men sitting in a row with their hands zip-tied behind their backs, their weapons piled in front of them. Most of them were mercenaries who had no loyalty beyond their paychecks. A few were former military, men who had lost their way and ended up selling their skills to the highest bidder. None of them seemed surprised that the operation had fallen apart. Yemisi walked among them, looking at faces, searching for something she could not name. These men had hunted her through the jungle. They had tried to drown her in the bunker. They had followed orders that would have ended with her body dumped in the Pacific. She felt no hatred, only exhaustion. One of them looked up as she passed. Young, early 20s, the same age Dmitri had been when she killed him. He asked if she was going to execute them. She said she was not. She said they would face trial. She said the justice system would decide their fates. He laughed bitterly. He said the justice system was a joke. He said rich men bought their way out of consequences while poor men rotted in prison for stealing bread. She said he might be right. She said the system was imperfect, but it was still better than the alternative. Still better than a world where the strong simply killed the weak without accountability. He had no response to that. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived within the hour, a Navy Seahawk descending through the morning mist with its rotors beating the air into submission. Corpsmen rushed to Varnin and loaded him onto a stretcher. He grabbed Yemisi's wrist as they lifted him. He said he was sorry for hunting her, for the things he had said about Adiz, for 6 years of hatred aimed at the wrong target. She said she was sorry too, for Dmitri, for the intelligence failure that had cost him his life, for the knife she had put through his throat when he was trying to surrender. He said they were even now, 2 debts paid in blood and regret. She said they would never be even. Some debts could not be balanced. Some wounds could not heal. He almost smiled. He said she sounded like a philosopher. She said she sounded like a tired woman who wanted to go home. They loaded him into the helicopter, and she watched it rise into the sky, carrying a man who had spent 6 years trying to kill her. She did not know if she would ever see him again. She did not know if she wanted to. Morrison approached with his satellite phone. He said NCIS had received the transmission. SEAL Command had received it. The Pentagon had received it. Her evidence had triggered the largest investigation into military intelligence leaks in a decade. He said she was a hero. She said she was a survivor. Heroes were people who chose to save others. She had simply been trying to stay alive. He said that was what heroes always said. The Galloway sent a launch to retrieve the Navy personnel and the captured contractors. Yemisi stood on the dock and watched the island grow smaller as they pulled away. The fires in the jungle had burned themselves out, leaving scars of black ash amid the green. The compound looked abandoned now, empty buildings and empty guard posts, and the empty space where Haskell had died. She thought about the biological weapons still sealed in the bunker beneath the main building. She had told Morrison about them. He had already contacted hazmat teams. The island would be quarantined, and the weapons would be destroyed. Another remnant of the Cold War erased from the world. The launch reached the Galloway, and she climbed aboard. Sailors lined the railings, watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to awe. Word had spread. They knew what she had done. They knew what she had survived. She ignored them and walked toward the medical bay. A corpsman met her at the door and insisted on treating her shoulder wound. She sat on an examination table while he cleaned and stitched the bullet hole, his hands steady and professional. He said she was lucky. A few centimeters to the left, and the bullet would have shattered her clavicle. She said luck had nothing to do with it. He smiled and finished his work. He said she should rest. Said her body needed time to recover from blood loss and exhaustion and the accumulated trauma of the past 12 hours. She said she would rest when she got home. The satellite phone in her pocket buzzed. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. A message from SEAL Command. 2 sentences that made her heart stop. Extraction team en route. Your husband is on the line. She found a quiet corner of the ship and pressed the phone against her ear. Her hands were trembling. She had faced 35 armed contractors without flinching, but the sound of her husband's voice made her shake like a leaf in a storm. Emeka. He said her name like a prayer, like a word he had been holding in his chest for hours, afraid to release it, afraid that speaking it would somehow make her disappear. He asked if she was hurt. She said she was fine. He asked if she was lying. She said only a little. He laughed at that, a broken sound that was half sob and half relief. He said he had known something was wrong. He said he had felt it in his bones from the moment she left. He said he had been sitting by the phone for 12 hours, waiting for news, preparing himself for the worst. She said the worst was over. She said she was coming home. He was quiet for a long moment. She could hear him breathing, could hear the small sounds of their apartment in the background, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, the ordinary noises of a life she had almost lost. He asked what happened. She said she would tell him everything when she got home. She said some of it would be classified. She said some of it she might never be able to share, but she would tell him what she could. He said that was enough. He said it had always been enough. He said he had married a woman who carried secrets, and he had made peace with that 20 years ago. She felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She had not cried in years, had trained herself to push the emotion down, to save it for later, to focus on the mission. But there was no mission now. There was only a phone line connecting her to the man who had loved her through 2 decades of silence and secrets and nights when she woke up screaming. She said she loved him. He said he knew. She said she was sorry for all the missed dinners, for all the birthdays she had celebrated from forward operating bases, for the years she had given to the Navy instead of to him. He said she had nothing to apologize for. He said he had known what he was signing up for when he married her. He said loving Yemisi Adeyemi meant loving a woman who would always be partly somewhere else, fighting battles he would never see. She said that part of her life was over now. She said this was the last mission. She said she meant it this time. He said he believed her. The connection crackled with static. The satellite link was unstable, the signal bouncing through relays across the Pacific. She pressed the phone harder against her ear, desperate to hold onto his voice for as long as possible. He asked about Nigeria, about the trip they had talked about the grave they had never visited. She said she was ready. She said she needed to go. She said 10 years was too long to avoid saying goodbye to her daughter. He said he would book the flights. He said he would arrange everything. He said by the time she got home, they would be ready to leave. She thanked him. The words felt inadequate. She had never been good with words. She was better with action, better with the silent language of violence that had defined her career. But Emeka understood. He had always understood. The helicopter arrived 3 hours later. A Seahawk carrying a SEAL team that had been dispatched from Pearl Harbor the moment her transmission reached command. She stood on the deck of the Galloway and watched it descend, the rotor wash whipping her hair across her face. Karina Vasquez was the first one off. The young woman ran across the deck and stopped in front of Yemisi, her eyes wide, her expression caught between relief and awe. She said, "Master Chief." She said they had received the transmission. She said the whole team had been mobilized within the hour. Yemisi looked at the compass hanging around Karina's neck. The brass instrument her father had carried through 3 wars. The talisman she had given away 3 days ago, believing she would never see it again. Karina followed her gaze and touched the compass. She said she had wanted to give it back. She said it belonged with Yemisi. She said the mission was over and the compass had done its job. Yemisi shook her head. She said the compass was exactly where it needed to be. She said it had brought her home. Now it would bring Karina home too. Karina's eyes filled with tears. She said she did not know how to thank her. She said Yemisi had saved her life in more ways than one. She said that 2 hours in the pool had taught her more than 6 months of formal training. Yemisi put her hand on the young woman's shoulder. She said Karina did not need to thank her. She said paying it forward was thanks enough. She said someday Karina would find a young woman who needed guidance, and she would give her the same gift. The debrief took 4 hours. Yemisi sat in a conference room aboard the Galloway and told her story to 3 admirals, 2 NCIS agents, and a representative from the Pentagon. She told them about the trap, about the hostages who were already dead, about Haskell's network and Varnon's grief and the biological weapons in the bunker. They listened without interruption. When she finished, Admiral Katerina O'Yelerin leaned forward. A Nigerian-American woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for fairness that preceded her across every fleet in the Navy. She had known Yemisi's father. She had been at her commissioning ceremony 23 years ago. The admiral said the evidence was overwhelming. She said Haskell's network had been rolled up within hours of the transmission. She said 14 people were already in custody and more arrests were coming. She said Yemisi would receive full credit for exposing the conspiracy. She said her record would reflect who she truly was. She said the Navy owed her a debt it could never fully repay. Yemisi said she did not want recognition. She said she wanted one thing. The admiral asked what. Yemisi said she wanted to go to Nigeria. She said she needed to visit her daughter's grave. She said she had been running from it for 10 years, and she was tired of running. Admiral O'Yelerin nodded slowly. She said compassionate leave was approved effective immediately. She said a transport would take Yemisi wherever she needed to go. She said Adiz would be proud of her mother. Yemisi closed her eyes and felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had been carrying for a decade. A weight she had almost forgotten she bore. For the first time in 10 years, she let herself breathe. The village sat at the edge of a river that flowed toward the sea. Green hills rose on every side, dotted with mango trees and palms that swayed in the warm breeze. Yemisi had not been here in 15 years. The last time she visited, her grandmother was still alive, still telling stories on the porch of the family home, still teaching her granddaughter the old ways of reading water and wind. Now her grandmother was buried beside her parents in the cemetery on the hill, and beside them, in a grave marked with a small stone angel, lay Adiz. Emeka walked beside her through the village. He had been quiet since they landed in Lagos, giving her space, letting her process the return to a place she had avoided for a decade. He knew her well enough to understand that some journeys required silence. The cemetery was peaceful. Birdsong filled the air. Sunlight filtered through the branches of an ancient baobab tree that had stood watch over the dead for generations. Yemisi's family had been buried in this ground for 200 years. Farmers and fishermen and teachers and warriors. Her father had been the first to leave Nigeria for America. She had been the first to join the military. Adiz had been the first to come back. Yemisi stood before the small grave and felt the weight of 10 years pressing down on her chest. The angel on the headstone was weathered but still beautiful, its stone wings spread wide, as if preparing for flight. Emeka had chosen it. He had handled everything while she was still deployed, still chasing missions, still running from the grief she could not face. She knelt in the grass and touched the stone. She spoke to her daughter in Yoruba first, the language of her grandmother, the language of prayers and secrets and lullabies sung in the dark. She told Adiz about the years that had passed, about the missions she had completed, about the men she had killed and the lives she had saved and the long nights when she had lain awake wondering if any of it mattered. She told her about the island, about the black water, about the brother who had hunted her and the traitor who had sold her. She told her about surfacing in the darkness, about refusing to become a weapon of destruction, about choosing to survive even when survival seemed impossible. She told her about Karina, about passing the compass forward, about the next generation of women who would swim through darkness and emerge into light. She told her about Varnon, about the strange peace they had found in their mutual grief, about the way loss could connect people who should have been enemies. She told her about Emeka, about the husband who had waited through 20 years of silence and secrets, about the love that had never wavered, never faded, never demanded more than she could give. Then she switched to English, the language of her daily life, the language of mission briefs and after-action reports, and the clinical vocabulary of violence. She said she was sorry. She said she was sorry for not being there at the end, for choosing Yemen over a hospital room in San Diego, for believing the mission was more important than her daughter's final breath. She said she had carried the guilt like a stone around her neck, had used it to drive herself harder, push herself further, take risks that no sane person would take. She had been trying to earn something, redemption maybe, or punishment. She was never sure which. She said she understood now that she could not earn forgiveness. Forgiveness was not a transaction. It was not a debt that could be paid through suffering. It was a gift, and sometimes the person who needed to give that gift was yourself. She said she forgave herself. The words hung in the air. She had never spoken them before, had never believed she had the right. But kneeling in the grass beside her daughter's grave, she understood that carrying the guilt forever would not bring Adiz back. It would only ensure that Yemisi never truly lived. Emeka's hand found her shoulder. He did not speak. He did not need to. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. The waterproof image she had carried through a dozen deployments, pressed against her ribs beside her heart. Adiz at 7 years old, smiling at the camera, her eyes bright with the curiosity that had defined her short life. She kissed the photograph and placed it on the grave. She said goodbye. The sun was setting when they left the cemetery. Orange and purple light streamed across the sky, painting the river gold. Yemisi walked with her hand in Emeka's, feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight was not gone entirely. It would never be gone entirely, but it was bearable now, shared between the living and the dead. 6 months later, she stood at the edge of a swimming pool in San Diego. 20 young women treaded water before her, their faces nervous, their bodies exhausted from hours of training. Combat diver candidates, the next generation of women who would swim through darkness. Karina Vasquez floated among them, no longer a student, but an assistant instructor. The compass hung around her neck, glinting in the California sun. Yemisi called for attention, and the pool went silent. She told them about the black water, about the fear that lived in the darkness and the strength that lived inside themselves. She told them that the ocean would try to kill them 100 different ways, and their only defense was discipline and training and trust in the women beside them. She told them that she had surfaced from the black water more times than she could count, that she had faced death and chosen life, that she had crawled out of the darkness and into the light over and over again until the darkness became a place she no longer feared. She told them they would do the same. One of the candidates raised her hand. Young, nervous, ambitious. She asked Master Chief Adeyemi how she had survived so long, asked what the secret was. Yemisi smiled. She said the secret was simple. You kept swimming. No matter how dark the water became, no matter how far the surface seemed, you kept swimming until you broke through. She dove into the pool and disappeared beneath the surface. 20 young women followed her into the deep. If this story moved you, drop a comment about your favorite moment or character. Perhaps you know someone whose silent service was never acknowledged. Share their story. Let them know they are not forgotten.